people who realized that they had an encounter with a serial killer? How did it go? Before we dive in, just a quick heads up. This video covers some disturbing events. If that's not something you're comfortable with, feel free to click away. So, back in 1999, we lived in an industrial area in St. Louis. We lived literally 100 yards from railroad tracks. My mom and sister lived right next door to each other. And one day, my mom calls out to me from the front porch, and I go outside, and there's this guy out there, and she asked me if I could get him some water. So I went into the house, grabbed this guy one of those big plastic takeaway cups you would get from fast food places, full of ice water. He sat there looking at us for a bit, and then my Rottweiler came strolling out of the house, and he moved on and back up toward the railroad tracks. Fast forward like a month later, my sister comes flying into the house, grabs the remote, and turns on the news. They had just arrested the suspected serial killer Angel Resende, the railway killer, and they show him on TV again. And it was the same guy that I gave water to just a few weeks earlier. Come to find out, after he hopped the train again in St. Louis, he most likely headed to Gorham, Illinois, and ended up killing George Morber and Carolyn Frederick. We actually spoke with the FBI at the time to help establish a timeline. Next story, my neighbor was kidnapped out of her house and murdered by the guy who worked at the gas station down the road from us. The gas station was about 200 yards from both a nursery school and a middle school. I don't remember him, but my parents do. I do remember that I saw my neighbor every single day when she walked to her job, and she would smile and wave at me. And then one day I saw her picture on a missing persons poster in town. The man who killed her then killed 3 other girls, including 2 sisters. He had previously been convicted of rape and was granted parole after serving less than half his sentence. He killed my neighbor 9 months later after his release. He probably saw 150 kids a day, including me, and chose her. I believe the laws in my state were changed after his crimes about sex offenders living and working in such close proximity to schools. Next story. My grandmother had 3 husbands die of food poisoning accidentally. I don't believe it for a second. Next story. My grandmother was one of Harold Shipman's patients in the general practitioner surgery he was finally caught in. She didn't go to the general practitioner again for years, not because Shipman was the most prolific UK serial killer, but because she couldn't find a general practitioner as good as Shipman. He did a lot for her in both physical and mental health, and he generally got away with what he did for so long because he was a good general practitioner and others' negligence. Peter Topping, Moore's Murders detective, was also a family friend and a guest at my parents' wedding. Next story. It happened 30-plus years ago. X had a construction business. Came by my house with his brother and another man to give me an estimate on some work I wanted done. Immediately had bad vibes toward the other man. Something was off. Then my dog went absolutely crazy attacking the other man. She had never done that before to anyone. Watching the news 3 days later, the other man they brought with them, the one my dog attacked, was arrested for the murder of 3 women. Edit, he was also suspected in 4 other missing women. Next story, I met Jeffrey Dahmer in a diner. I'm not sure if he was out of fresh body parts or what, but he was eating real food. My friend and I were drunk, and my friend thought he was cute and chatted him up. He wasn't interested in her. We chatted for maybe 30 minutes about innocuous topics, and he left. It was about 2 years before he was caught. When his picture was first on TV after the footage of freezers being dragged out of his apartment, I couldn't figure out why he looked familiar. Then, like a ton of bricks, it hit me. If my friend had been a dude flirting with Dahmer that night, may have had a horrible outcome. Imagine flirting with Dahmer. That could have gone horribly wrong. Next story, I knew Paul Reed, the fast food killer. He was my neighbor's uncle. He came and hid at their house after the murders for 3 months. We lived on a compound, so we all went to church together. He became friends with my dad and had dinner with us. We were homeschooled at the time, so when we would go outside to play, he would come out and play games with us. Then one day, his red car was gone. That afternoon after dinner, we turned on the TV to watch the news and a night program, and we saw him getting arrested for the murders. My parents called my friend's parents across the street, told them to sit down and turn the news on. He wrote to my dad from prison. My mom read the letter and threw it away. Next story. I'm definitely sure I have because my cousin is one. We were quite close before it was revealed to me and the rest of our family that he is a monster. And our last encounter was in September 2020, when he hugged and consoled me at my dad's viewing. His death wasn't related to the cousin. Roughly 6 weeks later, he killed his final victim and was arrested 2 weeks after that. That's when we all found out the truth about him. He also referred to my brother as his little buddy, and they were particularly close, which now makes me so angry because my brother is autistic. As was his final victim. 2 of the others had unspecified learning difficulties. I also set him up with a close friend of mine who fits in his victim pool, but thank God he didn't kill her. I assume it's because that would have been too close to home to get away with. Someone asked, "Did you ever find out why he did it?" OP replied with, "He didn't seem to have a real motive. There's an audio recording somewhere online of an interview with him talking about his first victim. He had apparently been wondering what it felt like to kill someone, and decided to go for it one day while out in the woods with a friend. Saw a weapon of opportunity, a thick, heavy branch or something, and struck his friend in the back of the head with it while walking behind him. Repeatedly hit him until he died. He described it as the most intense high you could ever experience, so I assume that was his reason for continuing. He claimed the next two had been killed during an argument, so I guess that's a weak excuse for a motive, but the last victim did literally nothing to upset him, or anything, so he just wanted to kill someone. He met her on a dating app and seemed like he was looking for vulnerable, naive women when he found her. His name is Harold David Hallman. Next story. My aunt and uncle have met and had the landscaper killer over for dinner twice. He was a longtime friend of my uncle's best friend. They both said he was mild-mannered and were completely shocked to find out about the murders. My uncle's friend has been pretty unwell since everything came to light as he worked with him on the property where remains were found. Next story. I was walking home from a friend's house at dusk. A guy in a car started yelling at me. He got more and more graphic about what he was going to do to me, not just sexual stuff. I managed to get away from him. A couple of days later, a friend of mine who lived in a different neighborhood was murdered. It ended up being the same guy who chased me. He killed a couple of other women and girls in other states before he ended up in my town. What really bothers me is that I called the police and they didn't believe me. I also called my dad to come get me after I doubled back to my friend's house, and he refused to come get me. So I still walked home that night. Next story. I was a classmate of the Virginia Tech shooter, Cho Seung-hui. Guy gave everyone bad vibes from day one. One of our professors had him removed from her class because his behavior was so disturbing. Another went to the police because of his violent writings. A female classmate called the police on him after he turned up at her dorm room door out of nowhere. Obviously, none of this was enough for law enforcement to take any real action because he was able to murder 32 people. Next story. My mother encountered Ted Bundy. He tried to get her into his car by asking for directions while she was walking to the library. Yes, she was his type. She remembers it super clearly because she had a Volkswagen that was identical to his back then. She said she was weary of him because he was weirdly persistent in trying to get her to come up to the window and she wouldn't do it. She stayed as far back on the sidewalk as possible and kept walking to a cross street that had more people. He followed until she got there and sped off in the opposite direction. She had told that story for years and has always said that if you're uncomfortable, trust your gut because it can save your life. Next story. In 1974 and 75, I worked at the University of Washington with a lady who knew Ted Bundy. Her husband went to law school with him and, in fact, started a defense fund for him. She swore up and down that he wasn't a murderer and they got the wrong guy. She never wavered from that belief. When he jumped out of that window and escaped the courthouse, I asked if she still thought he was innocent. She said yes. She said they had him over for dinner. He helped them move. I don't know what her final thoughts on him turned out to be. She, and I for that matter, was young and had long dark hair parted down the middle. His type. Scary times in Seattle. And because of dumb people like that, serial killers get away. Next story, my sister Debbie worked with a serial killer. She also worked with another girl who was also named Debbie. One night, my sister didn't feel like working and she asked Debbie to work for her. The other Debbie agreed, and that night the serial killer killed the other Debbie and threw her body into the river below the restaurant. My sister felt very, very guilty about this and thought that she was responsible for Debbie's death. However, it turned out that the serial killer had a thing for the other Debbie. Later, it turned out that he had murdered another woman when he was a paperboy in high school. My sister told me that she had gone to this guy's house after work on occasion and had drank with him at his house. I am so thankful that nothing happened to her. The most stressful thing was that I got a phone call saying that Debbie had been killed. I thought it was my sister. I still feel really bad for the other Debbie's family. Next story. My father is a sadistic psychopath. I know that's a big statement, but after years of trying to figure out what the hell I went through, it's the only thing that fits. I barely survived my childhood. I grew up knowing he would eventually off me. I would not be surprised if it ever comes out that Dad has a body count. I've contemplated submitting my DNA just so it's in the system. My father spent his career in law enforcement with the power to destroy lives, Every so often, he'd mess with the wrong person and they'd stalk him and us. He was investigated many times for arbitrarily going after women in the legal system and having them thrown in jail. In other words, he framed them. He often bragged about throwing innocent people in jail. Dad was the fixer in the family and thrived on getting people out of legal trouble so they'd owe him. He's a string puller of his own flying monkey army. For example, my younger brother was busted breaking into houses and construction sites, and he got him out of jail time a bunch of times. He was able to keep him from ever having charges pressed against him, and his arrests don't exist in any system. I'm a grown adult, and I still live in fear he's going to come and kill me. I stood up to him too many times. I find it interesting how people say they met killers and they gave them the creeps. If anything, my dad is charming, educated, and likable. He has zero actual friends, but he's never creeped people out. You'd like him if you met him. Next story. I went on 2 dates with the Long Island serial killer many years ago when I was young and poor and living in Manhattan. He drugged me on the first date and I still went out with him again because poor. Second time, he was extremely weird, asking me to go to his beach house with him, being very demanding, then got into a physical fight with someone at the bar we were at which point I ran home as fast as I could and never spoke to him again. One of my girlfriends back then was a lawyer and was urging me to contact law enforcement because she was certain he was the guy. I thought she was being ridiculous. The day he was caught, another friend messaged me an article and I immediately threw up at seeing the image of him in handcuffs and was sick the whole day. And yes, I already called the FBI and told them my tale. Much longer than I care to type pit here, but that was the basic gist. Next story. Bob Berdella in Kansas City. He rented a spot in a flea market. It was called Bob's Bizarre Bazaar. My roommate and I would go to the flea market about every Saturday to look at the various shops and booths. We'd always stop in to look at his stuff and visit. Was always super nice to us. My roommate had pierced her own ear. It was a little irritated. Bob noticed her ear and asked about it. She told him she had pierced it herself. He was very concerned and cautioned her about making sure it didn't get infected, suggested how to keep it clean even. About a month later, we did our normal Saturday visit to the flea market and saw the gate closed on his shop. Asked the person who had the next booth why Bob's place was closed. Oh my gosh, that's when we found out he'd been arrested for awful crimes. He had been kidnapping, torturing, sexual assault, and murdering young men. One of his victims has escaped, and that's when his crimes were uncovered. Next story. I also would constantly pass a house on my way to work that was later a crime scene. Turns out a man offed an 18-year-old pregnant girl and tried to flush her remains down the toilet. They found her when the plumber was called. Her remains were found in a lake a month earlier. I had just had my first son 2 weeks before, and this house was about 10 minutes from me. Later came to find out he also murdered a classmate's sister many years before. It's suspected he has more victims, but it's very unlikely we will ever know because he's a true monster and will not talk. The 18-year-old who was tragically murdered had the same last name as me, so I am often asked if there's any relation. It was all very devastating, and as a new mother, I was crushed. Next story. A family member was married to someone on the FBI's most wanted list for killing several people. We had no idea he was a drug dealer and killer. Thought he owned a couple of small businesses, and that's how they had money. He always gave off a dark vibe. We only attended one BBQ at their house and never again because he gave off such a dark vibe. Years later, we saw his face in the paper and could not believe it. That family member has cut off contact with the family and gone her own way. Next story. One of my patients was a family annihilator. He came into the hospital chained to a wheelchair with 2 cops and got put in a side room. I'm a short, cute woman, but I'm also heavily tattooed, and we had a good chat about prison tattoos. My boss was terrified to let me treat him, but I have a track record of making really stubborn, usually tough male patients comply, so I was the best fit for his physiotherapist. And he actually ended up not being an awful patient, just a terrible murderer with anger issues that his wife and child paid for with their lives. I also treated a guy convicted of armed robbery after his release, and he was a very sweet, albeit not the sharpest tool in the drawer. I was a student at the time, and my educator then was also terrified. My other job at the time was instructing martial arts, and this guy needed treatment on his knee. Pretty hard to take anyone down after a major surgery. He responded well to my "you can swear as much as you want as long as you do your physical therapy exercises" policy. Next story. I had an employee that worked for me doing minor maintenance repairs on construction equipment. One day, it just took him way too long on a job, and I was pissed. I pulled the GPS info, and he was nowhere near where he was supposed to be. My admin and I both called him repeatedly with no response. Now I'm even more pissed because this wasn't the first time he took too long and didn't answer his company-provided Nextel radio. We start digging. Find out it has happened repeatedly. He got back late and I waited for him, alone in my office. I terminated him and he took it surprisingly well. Surprised me because I dealt with a ton of BS as a woman working in a male-dominated field and company. Few years later, I'm working in a different location for the same company, and some cops show up and want to know what I remember about him. I tell them I fired him, etc. They subpoena the GPS records from the company. Then they started finding the rest of the bodies. He pled down and pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. He was picking up prostitutes in the company work truck, murdering them, and dumping bodies in a rural part of the neighboring county. Next story. As a youngster, my parents told me the time my father met Ted Bundy. He was walking into my mom's workplace as Bundy was walking out. They exchanged pleasantries, and Bundy shook my father's hand. Bundy said he was working for a farmer in a town about 20 miles away. It struck my father odd because Bundy was wearing a long wool coat and his hands were baby-soft smooth, not the hands or attire of a farmhand. There were announcements in the 70s warning residents that he may be in the area. We live very close to Colorado. It was an interesting story. When I was nearly 40, I was at a birthday party for a friend and afterward went to her house for some homemade food. She was telling me of when she was a criminal justice student in college and wrote her thesis on Ted Bundy. She said some of her material came from the police reports from when Bundy attacked my mom, which took me by surprise. I decided to talk to my parents about it. My mom worked at Montgomery Wards in those days and was working there alone that day. Bundy came in and pulled her to a back room and dragged her to the ground. She said she started kicking and hitting him as hard as she could, fighting for her life. After a while, he got up, pointed at her, and said he was going to go get lunch and then come back for her, and then left. It was around this time that he passed my dad coming in as Bundy was leaving. My mom looked like she could have been a sister to many of his victims. My father drove around with the local sheriff looking for him at several restaurants to no avail. Today, my father can't stand watching documentaries of Bundy, as he is often shown in that same wool coat and same smug smile. My parents protected us kids from feeling like evil could be that close. Next story. I was once sat in my car at the back of a country lane car park eating pizza in the dark with a friend. No streetlights and just woods surrounding. Finished up and turned on the headlights and all we could see was a man-army crawling towards the car was a few meters away. I have never turned the ignition so fast and sped off in my life. To make it scarier, the guy just slowly got up and looked at us, didn't try to chase or grab the car or anything. Next story. Robert Lee Yates was an Army pilot flying OH-58s while I was flying UH-1s, same battalion but different company, at Fort Drum, New York. They would send us down to fly helicopter simulators once a year in Pennsylvania to maintain our instrument ratings. We would carpool in one vehicle. Bob had a van with shag carpet in the back, so he would drive about 5 of us during those trips. It was about a 4-hour drive, so we'd joke and tell stories to pass the time. I was a fairly new pilot who enjoyed hearing the veteran pilots tell war stories. Bob was a CW3 at that time and was a bit odd, but nothing alarming. 18 years later, we see him on TV being charged with multiple murders of prostitutes across several states. He had used a Corvette and a van for the murders. Next story. Not a serial killer, maybe. My dad joined the Army near the end of Vietnam, so got sent to Korea. He was a UH-1 mechanic and hung out with a lot of the Huey pilots and mechanics coming back from Nam. There was one Native American guy who I want to say was Apache. He had seen at least 2 or 3 tours over there flying combat missions and had loved it. I forget the guy's name. I'll have to ask my dad the next time I see him. For some reason, he made friends with my dad, who was this hayseed from Montana, and kept telling him about the crazy shit he'd done in the war. My dad was shipping out not too long after meeting him, and the guy seemed super insistent on having my dad stay over for dinner before my dad left. The whole experience was really uncomfortable since the guy was incredibly mean to his wife through the dinner, and my dad suspected that she was probably getting beaten. After they went out on the front porch as the guy got drunk while carrying a holstered gun, my dad was worried that he'd end up getting shot, so he humored the guy and listened to him go on. Eventually, he started telling my dad about this woman in Vietnam. They'd make a game of flying just off the deck over the rice paddies and trying to get the farmers who were walking on the walls between them to have to jump off into the mud. There was this one woman who was too proud to jump. They buzzed her several times and she just ignored them. He got infuriated by this, told the pilot to pull alongside her and blew her in half with a shotgun. He told my dad that he'd killed tons of people, but for some reason, this one woman got stuck in his head. He was seeing her in his dreams every night, and he kept seeing her death over and over. Then he started drinking more heavily and just sat in silence. My dad quietly excused himself, just glad to get out of there. A few months later, my dad ran into another guy from the previous base and learned that the dude who had told him this story had blown his brains out later that night. My dad is probably the last person to see him alive. I have no idea if the guy was a serial killer that used the war as a killing field, or just a regular soldier that got turned into a psychopath from too much combat exposure. But I've always wondered what made that one killing so different that it ended him. Next story. We were having a family barbecue at my cousin's farm in the late 70s, early 80s, when my 12-year-old cousin decided to ride his bike to the store. Just after leaving, a van pulled over to him and the driver tried talking him into the vehicle. When that didn't work, the man got out and tried to force him into the van. My cousin kicked and screamed and refused in every way possible to get away. A passing car saw what was happening and stopped, which probably spooked the van driver. The guy got back into his van and drove away immediately. My uncle, who was a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, had heard the commotion, had jumped into his car and drove to see what was going on. He managed to catch up to the van and arrested the guy for attempted kidnapping. Unfortunately, the charge didn't stick and the guy was eventually let go. The man's name was Clifford Robert Olson. We're pretty sure that my cousin might have been one of Olson's first attempts. Next story, I grew up in a small town in North Wales, UK. The local cinema had been closed for 15 years, but a guy from out of town had reopened it. As kids, this blew our minds, as it was a rural area with very little to offer in terms of entertainment, so it seemed unbelievable to us that we would actually have a cinema in town. On one visit to the cinema, I ended up needing to use the toilet during a film, so left the theater, walked through the foyer and into the toilet. There was no toilet paper, so I went back into the foyer and spoke to the cinema owner to ask if he had any toilet paper. I was younger than 10 at the time and very nervous about speaking to adults, but the owner was incredibly kind and friendly, gave me the toilet paper, and we had a conversation about the film and how happy I was that we now had a cinema in the town. I used the toilet, then went back into the theater. A few weeks later, the friendly cinema man was on the front page of every newspaper. He was Peter Moore. Next story. My uncle accepted a ride from Gacy. He wasn't supposed to be hitchhiking, but it was the 70s. At some point, he got a bad vibe and jumped out at a red light. When Gacy was arrested, he put two and two together. Edit. Since this got some traction, here's the full story. Uncle was 16 and decided to hitchhike home. Dude pulls over and he gets in. Immediately, the guy locks the car. As they're going along, this guy starts getting pretty creepy, saying things like, "We could go to the airport and I'll fly you anywhere you want." My uncle is very freaked out at this point and waits for his moment. He pulls the lock and jumps out at a light and takes off running. He says the guy started following him, but by going through alleys and stuff, he was able to shake him off. After he gets home, my grandma could tell something was wrong, so she asked him what happened. He admitted to hitchhiking and told Grandma what the dude had done and said. Grandma got a baseball bat and they drove around town looking for the guy, but didn't find him. It was not too much later that they arrested him and the story broke. My mom rode her bike over and watched them take the bodies out from down the block, or so she says. Grandma is based. Massive respect for Grandma. Next story. Not me, but my uncle. His manager at the fast food place where he worked in high school invited him and another kid over to his place after work. My uncle and his friend declined and were very glad they did years later when it became public what exactly his former manager, John Wayne Gacy, was doing to and with those kids he invited over. Next story. I was still using drugs/alcohol at the time, fall 2007, and I met a random guy at the Circus in Las Vegas, hours after being brought to Vegas, dumped and robbed from California. I ran with a rough crew of thieving drug addicts. Anyway, he invited me back to his for a drink. Normal-looking dude, mid to late 30s, looked like the guy that sang for Sugar Ray. Anyhow, he and I killed a 40. He said he was going to go roll us a blunt. What he actually did is get a set of handcuffs and a leather strap. He managed to partially handcuff me to the bed, and I had a fraction of a second to decide how to respond. Fear and anger and demand to be let go, which I was pretty certain would lead to me being dumped in the desert in a cooler full of Quikrete. Play along like this was fun and sexy, and make my escape when possible. So I ended up being injected with meth, and then a very unfun adult evening commenced, with me literally acting for my life, while being stupid high on a drug I hated and did not ever intend to ingest. After he was finished, I asked if he knew where the closest liquor store was, that I'd go out and get us round two. took his drink order, and strolled out casually. I think I slow walked it for 2 flights of stairs and then sprinted away, ducking into and then out of different casinos. I ended up homeless and drinking for another year. I'll be 16 years sober this summer, and that dude still haunts me. The vibe shift, the eyes going black, and the quickness with which he trussed me up. That wasn't his first time, and he seemed like a dead-eyed shark about to pounce. OP, I'm glad you're safe. Massive respect to you. Next story. Whilst I was at university, I worked at a cafe in a local shopping center. One of our regular customers was a mum and son who would come have breakfast most mornings. The mum was delightful, however the son always seemed a bit off. Nothing major, just you'd say have a great day and he'd reply with yes. Anyway, one day he comes in without his mum and has breakfast. The next day his face is all over the news as he had just been arrested for murdering his mum. Edit. Just to address some of the comments, the son was of adult age and reportedly suffered from paranoid schizophrenia. Mum was his carer. Next story. Traveling out of state for a vacation with my kids, at a gas station, this man starts trying to talk to my young daughter. I immediately got between them, but not before my daughter blurted out exactly where we were going and how long we would be there. I suddenly felt sick. Something about the guy scared me. I just knew there was going to be a problem. I hustled the kids back to the car and waited to drive away out of fear he might follow us. I didn't see him come out, so eventually I drove off, but I was paranoid about it afterward. 2 days later, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of someone banging aggressively on our door. He was screaming that he was with security for the complex and that there was an intruder seen in the area, so I was required by law to open the door. Obviously, I didn't fall for that. He started swearing and threatening me. Suddenly, he just stopped. Suddenly, something spooked him and he turned and bolted. He had been standing kind of off to the side and reaching over to bang on the door in a way I couldn't see his face. When he moved, I saw it. It was the guy from the gas station. He followed us through 2 states. The actual security for the complex drove around but never found him. There was a broken gate next to the condo that they said he got in through. Next story. Few years ago, my mother took my son, who was about 6 at the time, to get Santa photos done. Few months later, Toronto police arrested him. He had murdered several men. He ran a landscaping company and was hiding the bodies in the ground and planting potters of jobs he was doing, and also working as a mall Santa. Thing that's messed up to me is, I'm aware of his actions. But somewhere, a family has a photo of their child on his lap completely unaware. Full-fledged serial killer on display. His name Bruce MacArthur from Scarborough. Next story. My mom was living in LA when a man pulled her into his van. He spent the next 2 weeks driving around with her tied up, doing the unspeakable to her. One day he just let her go, told her he'd be back for her, so she got up and moved across the state. I'm so happy my mom is still with me. Edit. Since this got popular. This was 4 years ago, so ladies in the Los Angeles area, please be safe. A report was made, but there wasn't enough information to find anyone. My mom is here with us, yes, but she never quite made it back. My mom has always been one of my favorite people. I love her so dearly. One day I will be able to buy her a beautiful house by a river. OP, I hope one day you'll be able to buy your mom a house. Praying for you and your family's well-being. Take good care of her. Next story. I was a brand new parent and trying to be a good husband by getting up with my daughter when she cried at night. I remember rubbing the sleep out of my eyes as I looked at the clock and noting that was around 3:30 a.m. I laid down on the couch with her on my chest as she slowly quieted down and drifted back off to baby sleep. I always leave my porch light on as a security measure, and this night was no different. I was just about to take my daughter back to her crib when I heard a knock at the door. I tried to ignore it, but 2 more knocks came in succession with a plea for help. I took my daughter back to my wife and shut their door. She was kind of pissed until I explained what was going on. Through the window, I saw a relic from the 1970s. A white dude with fro accompanied by some wire-rimmed glasses. He was wearing a nasty t-shirt and dirty jeans. He knocked again and gave another plea for help. There was no car around, so he obviously arrived on foot. I finally asked him what he needed through the locked door, and he responded that he was injured and needed medical attention. I knew that was a lie. I lived a half block from the town hospital. You can literally see it from the porch. Just let me come in and use the phone, he insisted as he tried the door handle. I told him I'd do him one better. I would call the police for him. I did so, and as I was calling, he bolted. That's a good way to help someone. If you see someone needing help, just call the police and they'll take care of it. No need to risk your life. And that's it for today. Dear viewers, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss out. See you next time. Bye-bye.